More Naruto, more scaling. I'm gonna finish this series and get to the bottom of the scaling and their actual necessary minimums. I will have all the feats backed with scaling with 0 subjective higher ends. So to start this whole thing off and to stay on track, what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be looking to address each feat from chapter 300 and up as I go. So with that, that's going to start us off with Sasuke's quote-unquote blitzing of Naruto. Now, we can get a feel of the distance, the depth, and positions for this feat, but not a time frame. So we can't nail a guaranteed speed, but we can get some scaling from this. We know it was considered fast by Yamato, but that doesn't mean he couldn't react, for example, right? But if, for example, he covered the distance in around 0.02 seconds, that's what it would take for us to actually reach the Mach 3 speeds that we saw for Gates Lee for movement speed. That's just to show the time frame needed to match up to top tier speed from part 1. There are several problems with this feat, however. Starting off, Naruto was literally stumbling and collapsing from exhaustion before this. Him not reacting well, or being blitzed as some will say, isn't as indicative of the speed as you may think. When you follow up with the feat, because that actually matters, you'll see Sai from a decent distance move over to Sasuke and block his attack before his attack goes off, putting the combat speed at decently slow via Sai having nothing close to Gates Lee's speed scaling. Whether it be Sasuke being casual or whatever else you want to say, all I can do is shed light on the feat, and there's nothing indicative of even Mach 3 move speed or beyond Mach 2.1 combat speed shown here. Again, perhaps being analytical, careful, insert other possible reasons here, I don't know, for Sasuke here. I can only show what's in the manga. And hell, potentially, Yamato wasn't kidding here, and they all weren't even going all out against him. As for him destroying the portion of this area that he did, it's not impressive compared to what else will be shown, so sit tight, there's plenty more. Let's do some actual calcs then, alright? Let's look at Hidan and Kakuzu versus the Two Tails. Hidan considers himself the slowest attacker, and given feats we see later and such, yeah, it sticks. But let's look at this battle. With a volume of around this many meters cubed of concrete, if we were to pretend that, the entire building was nothing but just absolute solid concrete that the Two Tails Biju Bomb destroyed, we're talking about this many total joules via the 20 joules per centimeter cubed for violent fragmentation. Again, this pretends like every single cubic centimeter of space was filled to the brim with just pure concrete. So what we're talking about here would be multi-city block level, and is higher than if you used a more precise version to calc it, and not just the obvious the building is hollow in the majority of it, but in something like the Taylor's formula, based on the blast size, and especially that the blast itself didn't actually have shock waves. And going off of that, it also comes out to multi-city block level, albeit again an even lower number. I really expected my made up pure volume of concrete number to be much higher than the more realistic amount. Nope, both were still multi-city block. That said, this measures up to being between 7.93 to 12.78 times more joules than Naruto's 3-tail crater feat, not his 4-tail. This is pretty great consistency, to be honest. It's when we look at the AP, however, that we see it's hitting at around this many joules per centimeter cubed to around this many joules per centimeter cubed, or higher end wall level AP. This makes sense as they weren't injured at all. I am, however, curious how they hold up against a full power punch from Sakura if they just had to take it though. I'd imagine with her AP of this amount here, or we're talking high-end large building AP, we'd see her rip right through them. Not that they die from it, of course. There was also Kakuzu outright tanking the Two Tails' physical attack, as we know they took next to no damage though he was batted away. It's not like he wasn't budged or overcame the power behind the hit, just that he took it no problem. The only problem with this is that it's not something impressive enough to even calc in the first place, and behind the feat of the Biju Bomb, we have Deidara talking of how it was weaker than if they were a Jinchuriki, which is backed later in the series and kind of even now in regards to comparisons to Naruto. Something else that has to do with future scaling, however, is Naruto's shadow clones, and how many he can have out. This of course won't ever apply to how many total joules of an attack, or the potency of an attack, but it will apply, say if maybe he needs 1,000 hits to take out the durability of somebody. He can do it in a split second, right? Because the question is, can he really have 1,000 shadow clones out at the same time? Sure, we've seen hundreds, but 1,000? Well, the answer is yes, it's absolutely backed enough for the statement's validity. You'll see he needs a clone for each and every leaf on a tree, and that tree has no leaves left. Even if he had to take leaves multiple times, he'd have backed the 1,000 clones. 100 clones is no longer impressive at this point. We are at the 1,000 mark now. Even more, he's so good with them at this point that people like Shikamaru can't tell the difference between them. And hell, Neji had previously been tricked as well on, part 1. So let's further address what it means for chakra to be involved in attacks, because this will also have to do with scaling and is next in a lot of the things that I've been detailing. I've said for a long time that chakra-based attacks and elements never necessitate speed or power, for that matter, of the natural elements. The unmanipulated elements. It's clear in the scans too. So you can see the range, power, or scope of the jutsu comes down to the manipulation or control of the chakra within the jutsu. Nothing, I mean absolutely nothing, dictates therefore natural lightning speed from, say, a lightning jutsu. And, well, again, this matters as we get to Kakuzu. But we aren't there yet. Let's further address the shape and nature manipulation of the chakra, because potentially, if this is right, we can expect an exponential increase in power in utilizing both forms of manipulation. We'll see. Now we can get into Hidan and Kakuzu more thoroughly as they fight Team 10 plus Kakashi. Kakuzu is comfortably above everyone there in speed and power. Shikamaru's planning worked, but required everyone, and he still was in a winning position. So not just above Kakashi, but above everyone including Kakashi at the same time. He only lost 2 hearts, mind you, from Shikamaru's planning alone, and never from a difference in power or speed. Only from the planning. Again, with the second one being, of course, that Hidan actually took a heart by doing his little ritual. At no point was he overpowered or outsped. That is, at no point is what took any of his hearts. That said, Kakashi wasn't ever going all out in jutsu. He was going all out in his fighting, his speed, his power, of all other abilities other than letting himself get so low in chakra he couldn't use his Mangekyo. Given his showing versus Deidara, it's safe to say that even with Mangekyo, it would have required all of them simultaneously, still with Shikamaru plans up their sleeve, with his Kamui on top of it, if not for Naruto showing up. That's what would have been required to take out Kakuzu. I mean, hell, Kakuzu was too fast for multiple zero-tailed Narutos, as you can clearly see in their eyes. He was 0 tails at this point. It really did require a jutsu above Minato's to put him down. That said, it was also a 1v1 with Kakuzu and Naruto by this point, so that is a point somewhat against Kakuzu's scaling, because at that point, Naruto did not have backup. He was his own backup. And this is true for when his first Rasen Shuriken would have finished him. And yet, I mean, then again, in it not finishing him, from it being a dud, we still see that if he actually catches the real Naruto, if he catches him slipping once, he's finished. He could not get out and clearly needed Kakashi to free him and Yamato to support Kakashi in freeing him. But finally, he does land the Rasen Shuriken in a 1v1 fashion, and we have something to calc. What we're seeing here, with the total volume of cratered rock at around this many cubic centimeters, this makes for about this many total joules, so we are looking at around very low-end, small-town level total joules. This puts the AP then at around this many joules per centimeter cubed, or we're looking at very low-end building level joules per centimeter cubed. But there's more to this feat. A lot more. This feat is suggested to be merely half power. And if that's true, and we were to double these values for a hypothetical full-powered Rasen Shuriken, then we'd expect this many total joules, or small town level total joules, with an AP of around this many joules per centimeter cubed, or low in building level joules per centimeter cubed. This means, in comparing Naruto at this point to Naruto when he fought Sasuke at the end of part 1, Naruto can now, at 0 tails, output around 24.75 times more AP, or joules per centimeter cubed rather in my case, than he could as 1 tails with a full power Rasengan, using his now Rasen Shuriken, at minimum. Assuming again it does back up, however, that it's only at 50%, it'd instead be 49.5 times more potent, or 49.5 times as much joules per centimeter cubed. Now, all this said, sort of like I've mentioned in the comments before, this is calking. Not every bit of this is direct scaling. When we consider the scaling, it's obviously above Sakura's full power punch. And so, what does that mean for this feat? It simply means it showed a lesser feat. It's true. Her iron punch and everything that was destroyed with her full power punch, that is a more impressive feat shown. The Rasen Shuriken and what it showed was less impressive, but in its scaling above that full power punch, it still must have at minimum the same AP as the feat it scales above, like anything else, putting its AP in line with Sakura's feat, and must at least, at minimum, right, if it's going to be matching, the same amount of joules per centimeter cubed, or the high-end large building AP instead, such as what Sakura can put out. It's at least that amount. Of course, this would even apply with it at the 50% mark, meaning in scaling this move, it scales, not calcs, but scales, to around this many joules per centimeter cubed, or very high-end large building level potency if the 50% statement is backed. Additionally, yes, I'm aware this attack is higher than even these numbers, but by an unknown degree. We can only derive the numbers I said from scaling. You will not beat Sakura's feat with this feat in calcs alone. Something extra, because it's fun and why not, a human cell varies in size based on what type of cell, but in using blood cells, they come at a volume of around, look at this number, and it's that many times smaller than a single cubic centimeter. We're talking the size of a cell, a blood cell, astronomically small. I already know most don't understand total joules and how to figure AP from there, but for those interested, we can use that figure to get an idea of how much force the Rasen Shuriken is applying to some of those cells on a cell-by-cell basis. And the figure is this many joules per 100 micrometers cubed. It's an astronomically low number. It's too small to have on a scale anywhere else. So it's like applying almost no force. Oh, it's so weak, right? Here's what I want to point out. That number is that small because it's the force being divided across micrometers instead of centimeters. It is no longer cubic centimeters, right? Look at these two numbers. You have the joules per centimeter cubed on one side and the joules per micrometers cubed on the other. What I want you to understand is that these two values are exactly the same. But it is interesting to see how much force is being applied on such a small scale and cutting every individual nerve. Anyways, all of that only addresses power. What about speed? Let's look at Kakashi versus Kakuzu's lightning. The lightning attack, as has been shown, suggests zero evidence for a positive truth value in it scaling to IRL lightning or even close. Understand that. It's heavily manipulated chakra with properties of lightning moving at an unknown speed. Given current scaling shown, we'd expect this attack to be around Mach 3 plus in its scaling to other Biju, which scales to the pseudo-transformed Gaara, which scales to the Chunin Sasuke, which scales to the Chunin Lee. I know, it is an extremely low number, right, I understand. I'll be revisiting this and others that scale to later people, as I'm only covering in a linear fashion as of now, and this is only covering from chapter to chapter, and this is pre-chapter 400. At this point in the manga, The lightning jutsu is only targeting Choji and Shikamaru of all people. This is not necessarily the greatest benchmark for showing you're too fast for someone. Worse, as was covered in the last video, it took Guy going 6th gate to attack at speeds of Mach 2.2 to Mach 6, with Mach 2.2 being a bit unrealistic from the other scaling, meaning for both Morning Peacock and this, we could expect some Mach 3 plus speeds for those attacks, or, again, obviously, attack speed. With that addressed, how fast is Kakashi here then? What we're seeing based on the distance he was knocked away at minimum, he traveled around 26 plus meters in a time frame of around this many seconds, giving a speed of around this many meters per second, or we're talking around Mach 11.64. Several things to finish on with this feat. First, we don't even know if this was normal movement, or if he used body flicker for this feat. I'm talking about Kakashi's movement speed. In scaling, thus far at least, it would be easier to argue body flicker and not normal movement. That does not mean it was body flicker. If it was normal movement, he dodged that attack all day. Granted, of course, he could run from behind it all the way in front of it and cancel it. However, second and absolutely most importantly, you have to understand this Mach 11 plus speed is only found in calc stacking, something I am against. If not obvious enough, that 11 plus calc is from calcing Kakashi's speed by stacking its calc on top of Kakuzu's lightning calc slash speed scale, right? This does make it a bit unusable, but even with the benefit of calc stacking, I just wanted to show where the speeds are heading. This then puts Kakuzu at the same speeds of at least that Mach 11 plus for calc stacking, aka at best. You could say, of course, if you really wanted to go at best, then Kakashi with the calc stacking, he didn't do body flicker, jutsu technique rather, and it was just his baseline normal speed. Kakuzu and his speed compared to Kakashi, you could argue is at least maybe Mach 12 to Mach 13. At no point was he like even close to being too fast for Kakashi and just straight running speed, so even then maybe this really is his speed is 11 plus, and his attack speed you could try and make arguments for somewhat. But without calc stacking and just going off of the minimums, bring us back to the minimums. There is no time frame to use and thus no speed feat to calc other than by using the minimums like within 1 second for Kakashi's movement speed rather than like the time frame using the calc of say Kakuzu's speed, right? And if we're talking about 1 second's time for Kakashi's speed feat there, that's a time frame of over 151 times longer than the calc stack, making Kakashi over 151 times slower as a feat. Again, I'm just showing what we're given and breaking it down. Sadly for Kakashi and Kakuzu, as an absolute lowball, even this Mach 11 plus speed would be constituted as via the body flicker, because that would necessitate like their minimum speeds with everything shown. Given we don't know it was body flicker or not, if it wasn't body flicker, then he's at minimum this speed. If it was body flicker, then it's at minimum this speed. So we take it as if it was body flicker if we want absolute minimums. Last thing with this Kakuzu section is to also show that Naruto's durability is also far lower than the AP of his own Rasen Shuriken, and you absolutely wouldn't need numbers close to the AP of the Rasen Shuriken to injure if not greatly injure Naruto and people scaling to him. This is why, although it scales above say Sakura's full power punch, if she were to punch him as though he was Sasori and with full power, Naruto is not going to be doing well at all. So, with everything covered thus far, let's finish this with a final recap of Sasuke versus Deidara. Because this fight is a big sticking point in inverse scaling, and I've always considered Sasuke of this time to have been comfortably above Deidara, for example. Let's look. Sasuke reacts to Deidara from above mid-attack and sacrifices a summon to block it. A decent interpretation is that he couldn't dodge it in time, but for me, he simply just doesn't have a feat of being able to dodge that attack in that scenario, that specific scenario. Not trying to do subjective scaling like you see most everywhere else, right? There's just simply not feats for Sasuke reacting to a type of attack in that type of scenario with the distraction. That's all that you can fully, truthfully say. Anyways, regardless, Sasuke has 2 Akatsuki level members in front of him at the start of the fight. He, charging in, attacks Tobi as he's the one that doesn't jump away, with Deidara acknowledging Sasuke's speed. What's apparent is that Sasuke is faster than Deidara. Deidara throws out many weak bombs that Sasuke easily incapacitates, and once more, we see that Sasuke's speed easily is above Deidara, with now Deidara showing he was unsure himself and how he even got away via the explosions. It also was a reaction from the help of Tobi. If it's not clear, I'm again making the case that Sasuke would be far too much for Deidara in a 1v1, and his speed would simply be too much. This matters for the scaling, but let's continue. Deidara once again comments on Sasuke's speed, and so while being next to an entire other Akatsuki level fighter, technically way more, we know who Tobi is, but to Sasuke's knowledge, right? He makes his C2 dragon, thus allowing him to finally get into the air and stay in the air against Sasuke. I've thought for a good amount of time now, and only feel more valid in saying Sasuke destroys Deidara in a 1v1 at this point. You remove Tobi from this and Sasuke is on him and attacking at speeds that just don't let Deidara breathe. And again, this matters for scaling, because how fast is Sasuke at this point, right? Sai was able to stop him, for example, but Sai's speed is unknown. He pseudo-blitzed an extreme exhaustion Naruto, so what? Where does Sasuke's speed scale? Basically, the thought is, there are no feats or scaling as of yet that puts him above Chunin Lee with no weights and 4 to 5 gates opened. With all of the current feats and scaling behind everything, Deidara would struggle with sub-Chunin Lee's maximum speed. We do, however, see that with enough space and no hiding, he can easily react and guide a bomb in conjunction to Sasuke's speed. Kind of like how you can't react to a car going 80 miles per hour from only, say, like 1 foot away from you, but put the car several meters away and you can. It's the same principle, and we're talking about it's the same speed. That car in that example, you get the point. But as it continues, he finally is able to take off into the sky, thank you Tobi, and this is the only shown reason for Sasuke's struggle in the fight. Deidara shoots multiple explosions, but with the Sharingan and far more than 5 meters to work with in distance, we can see why Deidara talks of his speed. Again, he can't hit him. So to make sure, he works on fixing that, right? He has to be able to hit him. And seeing if he can, at least in the explosions, land a hit. And we see he can. He can at least land a hit. Notice the cratering around Sasuke. I'm not calcing that because, I mean, it's very evidently so, an extremely small cratering. Calcing either feat, if you ignore destruction caused and calc based on explosion size using Taylor's law again, you get large building level total joules. At best. The AP, not so much. We'll get to his best feats, but there's not any good ones for either fighter thus far. By this point, this is his best feat, coming out to city block level total joules with, again, the AP, not so much. However, something very important by this time is that now Sasuke is using stage 2, giving around 10 times his chakra, not stats, but chakra. But that's not to say the stats don't increase. They do, again, just not in a 1-to-1 ratio if we're actually caring about the consistency of all feats ever shown ever with stage, stage 2, stage 1, whatever. That said, while we have no feats in scaling, Sasuke must have movement speed of at least Mach 6 at this point. We're talking about with minimums and what we can calc from their feats with like stage 2 compared to not stage 2, like from base, and using that for minimums. It's the most we can go off of. Mach 6. We're talking over 2 times faster than weightless gate 4 to 5 Lee. We can gather this minimum from tuning Sasuke scaling to just weightless Lee, and finally his stage 2 mark not scaling to but along and closer to the speed of the gates. By this time, Sasuke has shown that with his curse mark 2, he ought be at least that 2 times faster than Lee. I know I'm somewhat talking in circles here. I'm hitting the same point multiple times, trying to say it in other ways. I'm trying to convey the guaranteed minimums so that it's clear, because this is a lot to go over, and I actually encourage you to re-listen and go over what's being addressed here. So we can further support this minimum via the scaling involved with, for example, Lee versus Kimimaro, and the guaranteed scaling of Sasuke to Kimimaro, with both having curse mark and what the increase means. So what does this mean for Deidara? It means despite having such a handicap in his favor in being in the air, he's still screwed. And we can see he falls onto his own mines while Sasuke makes his escape from the explosions. Now, luckily for Deidara, it wasn't enough to kill him. Given the giant dragon taking the brunt and the explosions being vast in AoE and not very concentrated, makes sense. But now he's pulling out his C4, and as we know, this destroys on an extremely small scale, a microscopic level, not just stated but shown with feats and on-panel examples of size. A very potent and devastating attack for sure. This is something that's directly comparable in how the Rasen Shuriken operates, and talking about like the size level of it, and what I had said about the potency of it. Both of these go in regards to that. Luckily for Sasuke, of course, he can see chakra and was easily able to dodge it, but that only leads us to Sasuke and a very direct scan to the size of the C4 bombs, with now Sasuke having to survive this, which he does thanks to his lightning jutsu now, with him being a direct counter to Daedara on top of his speed advantage with his lightning. This leads us to C0. Finally going to break down the biggest feat of the fight. Take note of the explosion size, that thing is massive. The shockwave produced at the top, take note of that. The size relation to the city and the terrain, and lastly notice the low clouds to the higher clouds. It's massive. Right off the bat. The AP is going to be extremely low via calking, as something I've always said about the series is true. Most of all their biggest and best feats, and by biggest I'm talking about like the grandiose, like, man, that's really potent, that's really strong, that scales to be one of the best feats in the series, are all really large AoEs to cause the destruction that they do. But we have scaling and total joules to calc. Here, we can begin to see the crater, and most importantly, we can see the city or perhaps towns to the left and the right, as well as the roads that lead out of them. Once the dust settles and blows away, with Naruto and everybody else showing up, we can see the crater clearly. So when we look at the size of people, such as Karen to the size of the buildings, as well as to the width of the road, it's no wonder that even just the smaller middle crater of the larger total one is already more total force than Sakura's full power punch. It's finally been eclipsed, and by a lot. And in scaling it too, would have to have in potency at least that same amount of joules per centimeter cubed to what Sakura's had. Because again, the AP to the volume of the explosion, we're gonna get a low number in calking, but in scaling, at least equivalent. Consider the sizes here too. We're looking at around this many cubic centimeters of cratered rock, factoring in the volume of the smaller crater in the middle, of which is this many cubic centimeters itself. I mean, this is an amazing feat, and the first time we get into small city levels of power, meaning this is an amazing benchmark feat. The moment a feat, like, let me explain, like, by a benchmark, listen here, because yes, we have the total joules, but the AP, the volume is just too large to get any good AP out of this from a calc. But the moment a feat with confirmable more power than this comes, and in a way that shows some good potency, such as not being of extreme volume, looking at U-Pain, which will calc out better than this in total joules, but again with potency. Can something finally really amazing in Naruto just not have to also be extremely big in volume? Once that happens, we're going to have one hell of a scale to follow. Which is why Pain's Chibaku Tensei, when I get to that, is another amazing benchmark feat, but not an amazing feat for direct AP. We'll get there. But in fact, like in regards to speed with Deidara's feat here, you can see how close Sasuke is to Deidara during this feat. Very close. Remember that it produced shockwaves at the top, so albeit it's weird not seeing shockwaves elsewhere and only at the top where it is, shockwaves nonetheless. And those would indicate a high explosive, which is typically at least over 1000 meters per second. For this kind of explosion, we're looking at around Mach 2.9 plus to Mach 4.8 plus speeds. And for Sasuke to have gotten away from this explosion, you know, with his whole feat of summoning Manda and all of that stuff, while being a mere 6.9 meters from the explosion. I mean, insane, from like the epicenter. This means he had a mere 0.0069 seconds to summon Manda, put him under a genjutsu, and then use a space-time jutsu to escape at bare minimum. It is insane. So, for reaction speed alone, this puts Sasuke with no curse mark at a minimum of this Mach number here, per meter's distance moved, suggesting perhaps as much as this Mach number here, per meter's distance while at full power in stage 2. Let me explain again with what I'm doing with reaction speed. I am kind of like the joules per centimeter cubed, where I'm using the joules divided into each cubic centimeter of space for potency. For reaction speed, you can't actually just stick a number on it and have it make sense. Because this person can react to light speed. Okay, but from what distance? The distance matters, right? I can react, me now, as a normal human, can react to something that is the speed of light. If it's traveling from light years away, right? Like, I have literally years to react to it. So what I'm doing is breaking the speed down to a single meter's distance. So this, I'll show up the numbers again, is based on a single meter's distance. To put these numbers into another perspective, if you were to charge full power Sasuke from but 10 meters away, you'd have to have at least Mach 25 plus movement speed for him to not be able to react in any degree to you. That's where the math is coming to, okay? This makes for both the newest and highest addition to total joules via C0, and fastest reaction plus movement speeds via Sasuke, and even only in base. That said, the only last thing I can possibly draw from this is Kakuzu, who I want to address especially more so in the future, but the only way you have speeds above what is shown here for Sasuke at least minimum Mach 6 is if you say that the calc stacking, again, with Kakashi Mach 11, Kakuzu is faster than that, and thus his attack speed is also keeping up with those speeds. And it wasn't body flicker, you take all of those into consideration, and yes, now we are having Kakuzu scale up above to a degree where he is easily above Mach 11, right? That's the only other way to take this. So at this point, I think the video's gone long enough. I'm going to continue. Yes, I still have Itachi versus Sasuke and plenty of other things to cover, but for now, I'm going to end this video. I hope that everything becomes very clear. I can show some of these feats that I've calced here and give you the high ends, show you the numbers, and hope that you get a real good idea on what's coming out of this series at this point. And so, besides all that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe, especially if you want to see more and more of this and a whole take that's going off of necessary minimums, something that you're not really going to find anywhere else. Subscribe, you'll find a lot more and plenty of other videos that cover this level of scaling. I know this isn't the type of scaling that most can really have themselves bother with, but it's very in-depth. Perhaps even to my detriment, it's very in-depth. But I hope you enjoyed nonetheless, and hope to see you guys next time. Ciao.
master.